So the idea here is that I've got the sketches that we had of the Nightlight app, basically. And kind of the observation is that this interface is really just for a single nightlight. So hopefully, if we are a successful Internet of Things company selling expensive nightlights, we sell more than one to a household. And so people would need to manage multiple smart nightlights. So anybody want to kind of describe their approach to dealing with that? Yeah.
I basically took the approach the same way. You know how the alarm system is set up on a smartphone?
Mm-hmm.
How you can have multiple alarms and they each have their own different settings?
Yeah.
That's kind of the path I took.
Okay.
You can have it to where it has multiple tabs, where it has its own individual settings.
Okay.
So whenever you say, like, for during the week, you want it to turn on at 10 o'clock and then turn off at 8, but on the weekend, you want it to turn on at, 11 o'clock and turn off at, whenever you get up. So
Okay.
that way, during the week, you just press on the tab that has it set for your weekly settings, and
Right.
then it will respond to kind of that, and then on the weekend or whatever other time you have, you just turn off that tab and turn on the other one, and that's how it manages it.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good way to do it. Other approaches? Yeah.
Just doing squares at the top.
Okay, just switch between nightlights. Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. Anybody else? Yeah.
So I kind of just like made it really simple. Where in the smart nightlight, the first one,
Yeah.
you could click smart nightlight and like edit the name so you
Okay.
know what light bulb it is, and you can add another light bulb.
Right. Okay. So thinking a little bit beyond this, so we've got these 3 screens here. What are some of the things that this doesn't capture that might be involved with using the actual nightlight from the moment you buy it to your everyday use? Initial setup. So that's a big part of it. How does somebody add a nightlight? What does that interface look like? It has to exist. What else? Okay, yeah, custom settings. Anything else that happens? Often this isn't really a feature, but something you should think about. That's a good point. Kind of thinking along the lines of what happens when Wi-Fi is not working so great or you lose connectivity. Yeah, so the screens that we don't show here, what do you do when you can't find the user's nightlight or the network service isn't available or anything like that. So that's a big part of designing and prototyping is thinking about those use cases where things have gone wrong and how you get that information back. So, okay, if you guys will pass them this way. If you want to put a score on it, just give me a number, 100%. Whatever you would like to put there. All right, good deal. Okay, so before we get into today's topic, a couple of announcements. We will not have class on Thursday. Yes. I figure you guys probably have exams and, or maybe just want to go on spring break. So we will officially consider that time to work on exam 2 or your group project. And so exam 2, we voted on it and everybody said it's okay if it's take home. If you change your mind and that's not the case, then let me know and you can come sit next to me and take it. So what I'll do is Thursday morning, I will put it on Canvas, and it'll just be, I'll put it in, I guess, I'll export it to a Word document or something in case you want to type on it. but there will be questions that you'll need to sketch or draw. So however you want to do that. If you want to just draw it on paper, take a picture and drop it in, that's fine. Or if you want to digitally do it, that's fine too. So that won't be due until Thursday, March 21st, which is basically like an infinity away. So don't worry about that. So that'll be up there on Thursday morning. And then homework 1, I think I graded everyone's homework 1 at this point, which was the good, bad HCI. Man, you guys have seen some things. Some of the bad HCI was really good. But just kind of some interesting trends I noticed. Everyone loved Airbnb. I don't know if you guys are being paid by Airbnb or what's going on, but that was probably the one that showed up the most in good HCI. People tend to like Discord, the Discord app, so I didn't see anything negative on that, and it showed up in good quite a few times. Nobody liked Craigslist. Craigslist got a lot of hate. Which other ones? Reddit. Okay, there's a divide on Reddit, guys.
Reddit has good user experience, but not UI.
Yeah. So okay, personally, like the new Reddit, I am not a fan. At least on the computer. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I've always used third-party apps and on mobile, and some of those are okay, but but yeah, generally people were unhappy with both the old and new Reddit. I don't know if anybody said anything positive necessarily. There might have been a couple. Canvas. Okay, people were divided on Canvas. So some of you found a few redeeming things, and some of you just are tortured by it.
I can change your mind, whoever it is.
Okay. I mean, I think it's okay, but some people did detail ways that their instructors use Canvas that I could see being a horrible thing.
Most instructors currently are modeling Canvas incorrectly.
Yeah.
They get used to it, so
Yeah. Yes. Okay. Yeah. So there was some hate for Blackboard. Some of that was part of it. Controversial one. The Apple Watch showed up in both columns a few times. I think the common complaint was like the icons were too small, and so like you might accidentally tap them. But I sat there and I tried to do this with my watch, but it's actually not too bad. I don't know. I mean, I think it does okay. But like when you look at it, yeah, they look really tiny. But as far as the gesture recognition, it seems to not have any touches that you don't intend. But some people were divided on that. But that was homework 1. Homework 2. Is that due today? Tonight? Okay. So yeah. If you haven't done that, turn that in. Your quiz 3, I have graded some of, but not all of, so I will finish that and then post them so you can look at any comments on that. And then we will wait and do, we'll have 2 more homeworks this semester, which we'll do after spring break. And we will do a number of short quizzes similar to what we did today, just because we need more quiz grades. So that's announcements. Okay, so last time we talked about development methods and tools, and we talked about interfaces not existing, in this abstract, pure software world, and kind of the importance of understanding the underlying technology, and then talked about the layers of abstraction that were available to us, the things like SDKs and APIs and different standards. Then we started to talk about interface design tools, basically end-user level visual software to let you directly manipulate how your UI is going to look, and in some cases how it's going to behave, with a strong focus on the layouts of components. And then we looked at prototyping tools, modern prototyping tools for user interfaces. So we looked at Figma, just in mind, and Adobe Experience Design. And then I gave you this website which has this huge grid of them. Has anybody been using a prototyping tool? Or yeah, which one? Sigma. Okay. Is it working well? And, yeah. Anybody using anything else? Or Sigma.
I think you can do like all Google's material design and just copy paste it.
Yeah. It seems it has a lot of features. And I think the more time you spend with it, obviously, the faster you get and the better. But yeah. Anybody using any like add-ons or plugins or any specialty things yet? They're out there. So today, and these are some of the things that I made / commissioned to have made for the Smart Nightlight app, using those tools. But then we talked about some of the problems with these design tools, and the main one being that there's still a lot of programming usually required to facilitate an interaction. If it's not just scrolling through content or consuming content directly, if there are things like text input and filtering and ordering things, sorting things, these tools are not supporting that out of the box so much, but that is changing, and there are a lot of plugins and things to help that. So yeah, we talked about all of those things. And then I mentioned that I thought that the web was the answer. And so we talked about that it's not required for like your project or anything. You don't have to do it as a web interface, but historically that's how it's ended up. Just because for all of the projects, FedEx wants them to work on a tablet, a mobile device, a desktop, and kind of following just web development allows you to do that pretty easily. And we talked about that there really are not a lot of applications that require a native application. Certainly there are some, things like augmented reality or any kind of graphics intensive thing or anything that's using sensors and processing on board. That's a different story. But for the majority of apps, kind of taking a web approach is reasonable. And so also we see that big companies, big industry leaders strongly push web standards to expand and to be able to do more and more things. And so it's a reasonable choice, and I think it's a reasonable investment of your time if you're not familiar with web development to go ahead and get familiar enough to the point where you could build something like our FedEx project or quickly prototype something using web technologies. And I think that's probably something that will be useful to you in the long run. So today we will talk in detail about that. So we'll talk about, these are the three technologies. Let's actually just survey. How many people have written some kind of website? It's like half of us. So you got a web browser. Web browsers are, like Chrome, Firefox, Safari, Microsoft's Edge, used to be Internet Explorer. And the idea is you go to a website and it renders out the web page. You can go to it on any of these browsers and it should look similar. The browser supports three major technologies. There's obviously things you can add, and there are things that come and go aside from these, but these are the most stable things that all browsers try to implement standards around. So we'll talk about each of them. The first one is HTML, which is just the structure of a web page. The second is CSS, which is all about the look and the feel of a web page or web app. And I should say that CSS has started to incorporate a lot of components that allow you to do more interactive things, like animate things or react to certain events. That's become part of CSS. And then JavaScript, which is the only widely supported programming language that runs in the browser today. So you can certainly argue that there are plugins like Flash or something that would allow you to run like ActionScript or some other language, or even like a Java applet. But just native in a web browser, what's supported is JavaScript, and that's it. That's all we have, and I'm sorry, but that's what we're stuck with. JavaScript has gotten a lot of hate over its lifetime, and that's not entirely unreasonable or unwarranted. But thankfully, as companies like Google have invested tremendous resources in like building the Chrome browser, there have been tremendous efforts to make all three of these technologies really be at a point where they're very usable, and where you can do good development with all of them. So, starting with HTML, which is hypertext markup language. I put pictures of the people who made these things on here just so you have a face. So, important thing with HTML, sometimes people get confused and say it's a programming language. It's not technically a programming language, it's just a markup language. It's just describing the structure of a document. So, it came to us in the 90s. So this is Tim Berners-Lee. He created this, I think, when he was working at CERN, doing research there. And so there's a group, the W3C, that is the standards body for all of these web technologies. And so they put out, basically they have big working groups of people. It's usually people from industry. So you'll have members from Google, from Apple, from Microsoft, from Amazon, wherever, join this W3C group, and they have many committees within their organization. One of them is about standardizing HTML, for instance. And so they create draft standards, and they argue with each other online and in person until they come to a point where they publish what's considered a recommendation. So there are different levels of W3C specs. So there's like a draft, there are just proposals, but kind of the ultimate one is the recommendation. So that means that's like, this is what you should do. So HTML's had a number of recommendations put out. So what we're at right now, we are still in the age of HTML5, which actually came around in 2014. And kind of that's where things really changed drastically. That's the point where you know HTML3 and the 4, and then there were some there's XHTML, which is kind of a separate thing, but still HTML. Those have a lot. They're limited compared to HTML5. So HTML5 started to incorporate things like dragging and dropping files, or opening up a webcam stream, or stuff like that. So it was a big departure from the previous set of HTML. So I've put resource links here for you, so you can look at them later, and they're pretty helpful. So what is the main thing to know about HTML? And we're going to look at an example. But so essentially, you have elements in HTML. And the elements can be kind of just sequentially listed, but inside of elements, you can have more elements. So it's a tree structure. And so you have two broad types of elements. HTML5 has made this much more complicated, and there are like probably 10 or 15 types of element, but what matters kind of is this level of abstraction. So there are block elements, and those visually will take up kind of like the whole line on a page. So you put them, their new line is created, the thing is put there, and then the page continues. Inline elements don't get their own line. Usually those are things like if I want to make some text bold or something, I'm just going to emphasize this part of some content. And so they cannot contain other block elements. Block elements can have block elements inside of block elements forever. And that's how things get built. So I started working on building my web page here. And so I was inspired by several people submitted this wonderful website. that I had not seen before, so that was quite thrilling for me. So this is just my website with my favorite links. So here we've got HTML. HTML is just a text file with a .html extension, so this is just a text editor, whichever text editor you want. This first line is just saying, hey, it's HTML. Then you're going to see there are kind of paired tags, right? So at the top there's an HTML and there's a slash close the HTML. Okay. And then within here there's this head section and there's this body section. Okay. So head attributes, there are different things that go in here. This is kind of the bare bones what you need. So like this meta tag is just telling it the character set to use. That's just kind of a good practice to put that in there so that the browser knows what you're going to do. But that's largely a template. You don't even need to remember that. Title, so this is the thing that shows up in the tab. Okay. And then the body is where the actual page content is. Okay. So in my case, I've inside of this body section, and you don't have to indent in any specified way, but it's good practice to go ahead and indent each time you're going to go inside of these tags. It just keeps it nice and readable. So H1 is a heading one, a heading at the top level element. It's predefined for us, so I put my name there. I put my little, thing here in a P tag, which just means paragraph. These are block elements, so you see my title, and then the next line is this paragraph. Now within the paragraph, I've put this little strong tag around favorite so that it's boldish. That's the inline tag there. And then I've got a link. And so what you'll notice about HTML tags, this is just how HTML is you have all these tags. You can consider them elements if you like. They can have content in them, so like this H1, inside it has content, or in this body actually has more tags inside of it. But you can also have attributes. So you see href equals, and then this thing, which is just the URL that's going to go to when you click on it. That's also part of it. So you also have like the character set equals. And so that's kind of the approach there for something real basic like this. So browsers have a predefined way of rendering something like an H1. If you don't override that or anything, out of the box, the browser has a default. Users can actually load their own defaults if you're really, have certain preferences about how you want things to look. You can write your own CSS that defines how an H1 should look, and then everything that just uses an H1 without overriding it will look that way. So in this case, I haven't styled anything. This is just what the browser does out of the box. Okay, so let's start to make this look more interesting. So this guy started thinking that maybe we needed to be able to present things a little bit better than just what kind of browsers decided out of the box and how they should render things. And so cascading style sheets, or CSS, this is the language that describes how a document should be presented. So the HTML is just the structure of a document, and the style sheets really describe how it's going to look. If you don't provide a style sheet, the browser provides one for you, and it looks really plain and boring. So CSS is also managed by W3C. So it came around in '94, and it's got a number of standards. But something interesting happened. CSS 2.1 kind of, they ran into some fighting with each other and stuff. Anyways, so instead of just having, like CSS 3 is now a recommendation, they split CSS into a bunch of subgroups. So there are all these different parts or modules of CSS standard, and some of them are recommendations and some of them are not. So if you'd like to read in depth, you can go here and actually read the standards, which I do recommend doing at some point in your life, but probably don't want to commit a lot of time to it. Also put Mozilla Developer Network link. which is really good and thorough and kept up to date. Just kind of walking through CSS. So, okay, we're going to make my page better now. So the first thing you'll notice that I've done is in the head section, I am linking to what is a style sheet, and it's a file called greatcss.css. And then I've changed one thing down here. So where I did just have an h1 here, I've now said an attribute of class equals beautiful title. So you can apply classes to any of these elements. You can apply as many classes as you'd like to an element. And a class can apply to as many elements as you'd like. And so in this case, the class, you come up with these names. Okay, so my name is beautiful title because it's going to be a beautiful title when I'm done writing the great CSS for it. So writing the CSS in a separate file here. Okay? So this is greatcss.css, and this is the class beautiful title. Okay? So when it's a class, it starts with a dot, and then just the class name, and then open curly braces. So the first order of business is to get some sans serif font happening in there, preferably Helvetica, but if you don't have it, it'll just go to the default. So the way CSS works is you have an attribute, a colon, and then a value. And there are a billion of these, and you can look them up, and they're all wonderful. But so in the case of font family, I can specify basically just a comma-separated list of my font preferences. So I can put like Helvetica, and then if it doesn't have Helvetica, it'll try the next one in the list. Sans serif is a broad class of fonts, and so it'll just fall back to its default sans serif if that doesn't exist. I should mention that you can include fonts. You can do web fonts if you really need a font to get to a user. But it gets a little more tricky, and there's sometimes some licensing that goes with that. So the next thing is color. So this is just going to be the text color. And for its value, you can set, there are some predefined keywords like red, green, blue, white, there's actually a lot of them. Or you can specify an RGB value, and actually this is RGBA. So red, green, blue, and then alpha level, so your opacity there. What's interesting, RGB is 0 to 255 values. Opacity is 0 to 1.0 as a float. So just something to take note of. Then I kind of said how I want the text to be aligned in the center. And that I want there to be some padding. So we'll look at this in an interactive way in a bit, but padding is just saying that I want to put a little bit of space around my text. And I've used this unit called 1em, which is an em. So one thing that we kind of need to think about early on with web stuff, it's very tempting to say, like, I want this to be so many pixels, and you can do that if you want. Like, I could say, I want my padding to be 12 pixels, but that's a really bad idea. And the reason being that screen sizes vary drastically, and sometimes people want to make things bigger. So if you're in a browser and you do Control plus or Command plus to just kind of make everything larger, if I put a pixel value in here, it's not going to make it larger in a lot of cases, and that's going to frustrate the user. So what 1em is an em is equal to the default font size in the browser. So in most cases, the default font size is 12 or 16 pixels, and so 1em is equal to that value. So you'll see we can do things like 1.2, 1.3, 3 point whatever, and it's just going to multiply that by the default font size. That way, when the user scales up everything goes up as it should. Okay, so that's taking care of some of the text stuff. So next what I'm going to do is, within that heading element that I have, it's a block element. So by default, it spans across the whole page. We don't see it because there's no background or anything on it. So I went ahead and put a background of cyan, and so that's background color cyan. So I could have done an RGB, but I just chose a keyword. And then because by default, it spans across the whole page, what I've done is set a maximum width for the element. And in this case, I've used a unit, and it's a newer unit, VW. It's the viewport width. So it's 30% of the width of the viewport. And you can also do VH for height, if you like. And so I've thrown in a border. So a border, a solid border, medium size, black color. You can specify these separately. This is just kind of shorthand. And then just for fun, so CSS3 has really made things quite interesting and crazy. You can do things like apply filters or transforms or just all kinds of really matrix operations on stuff. And so I have rotated this entire element 180 degrees. And so, after all of this work, this is the glorious result that we've got here. Okay, so we've made it, shrink down there, and then I should say, just to note, I cropped this image, so this is 30%, but it goes a lot further. So now we've got this, and my name is upside down, but it's in the colors I want. It's got the border, and it's looking very nice. Okay. So moving on, can we make this even better? So in 1995, Netscape was needing to make a scripting language that would work in a web browser. And so they commissioned this guy to do it in somewhat of a rush. So it was written in 10 days. Might have something to do with the criticism that it gets. And something that people get confused about, it's not Java. Not even a little, okay? The reason it was called JavaScript is because Java was becoming insanely popular at the time. And so there was like a lot of buzz around the Java programming language. JavaScript is pretty far apart from the Java programming language. So that's just a fun fact to know. So the actual standard for JavaScript is the ECMAScript standard, which is not maintained by W3C. So W3C specifies kind of the interface between HTML elements and CSS in JavaScript, but the scripting language itself is governed by European something. It's the ECMAScript. Same thing though, it's a standards body. There are people from the industry, they meet, they come up with things, and it changes. So right now, ES6 is mostly supported in all the browsers. And so this is a big thing too with web development. There are lots of cool things that you can't really use widely necessarily yet. So things will be put into drafts, and so like Chrome will implement their version, and Safari will implement its version. But it's not a standard yet. And so it's not really safe for wide-scale deployment because some browsers may not support it, it may be broken on some. But once it gets to a state where it's fully supported, then we feel more comfortable using it. So here are some resources for JavaScript. And so let's get to it. Back to our page. So got my CSS, beautiful title. Now I've added an attribute to this strong tag that I had on my favorite, that I want it to be bold. So I've given it an ID. And the ID that I named is link adjective. So in this case, an ID is unique. So only one element on the page can have a given ID. So whereas a class can be applied to many elements, and elements can have many classes applied to them, an ID is just the opposite. An element can only have one ID, and an ID can only belong to one element. And so basically it's just this little element here is now named link adjective. And then you'll see at the bottom here, after the body tag, I put a script tag and type JavaScript, and then a source. And this is going to be my JavaScript file, pro-level javascript.js. And this is where I'm going to write the JavaScript that runs on this page. You'll see some sites will put these script tags up in the head section. The reason that you don't really want to do that in most cases is that most browsers will load things sequentially. And so if it loads in a script library that is going to execute immediately, if it just so happens that the browser is not quick enough to render these elements on the page, but that script executes before they're there, everything breaks in a horrible way. If you put it down here, you're guaranteed to have these things when you start talking about them. And there are other ways to do that, but this is just a quick way to do it. So let's see what we can do in the script tag. Maybe. Here we go. Okay. So this is my pro-level JavaScript. It's in a different file, pro-level javascript.js. So what I'm doing is creating a variable here. So possible adjectives. And so I have just taken things that might mean favorite. And it's just an array of these items. And then I've got a current adjective index. And then here, so you'll notice that I'm doing let for every variable, let whatever equal this. You can also do var, like var possible adjectives equals whatever. That's the way that we've been doing it for a long, long time. But in the past couple of years, let is now the standard to use, but you can use either. So in this case, we're going to get the element that is that little section of HTML that said favorite. Okay? And the way we do that is this is just a global function here. So document.getElementById, and there's that ID that I gave that element. And what that's going to return and store in here is just a reference to that little piece of HTML. And then I'm going to do kind of the most important part here. I'm going to take the link adjective, and actually, interesting. That should say link adjective element. So what I'm going to do is take the link adjective element, and I'm going to add an event listener for when someone clicks on it. And so the way that's working is we're taking our link adjective and we're calling a function add event listener, which exists for every element on a page. It's just built in. Okay. The first parameter for that function is the event type. In this case, it's just click. There are other events like mouse down, mouse up, touch started, touch ended, touch canceled. Like there's a billion of them. You can go look them up. The second parameter is a function or a method itself. And this is a little bit weird sometimes if you haven't done this before. It's what's called a callback. And essentially what's in here is going to get executed when this event happens. Okay? So we're just defining a function in line that's going to happen whenever a click occurs. Okay? And so what we're going to do is we're going to take our index, we're going to increment by 1, and then we're going to do a check just to make sure that we're not going out of bounds. If we're going out of bounds, we'll just start over at 0. And then we're going to take the link adjective element, dot inner text, which just gives you what's inside the element. In this case, it says favorite right now. And then we're going to replace that with something from our possible adjectives at the current adjective index. Okay, so whatever the new one is. So each time we will jump in this array and we'll update it.
Does that mean JS arrays start at 1?
They start at 0.
What's the 0 then?
Favorite. Yeah.
But you increment by 1 initially before you start doing any calls.
Yeah. Because I assume it'll start with favorite already in there by default, and then yeah. But yeah, they do start at 0. That's a good question. Okay. And so let me see. So what that looks like is now when I click on this, it's just changing that as we go through the array. So, and I should mention, you'll notice when I'm mousing over there that the cursor becomes a pointer. That doesn't happen by default. So in the CSS, So this is our beautiful title CSS. Down here, I've done this is a hashtag link adjective. So that's just referring to that little section that has, whatever the word is. And I've said cursor needs to be a pointer whenever it's over that. And so that gives me that behavior. Now, so I should say, in this case, we selected a class and wrote what we wanted the class to look like. In this case, we selected an individual element. You can do either way. Another thing you can do, so this is just the paragraph tag, which is all of this is inside of a paragraph tag. So I've selected it, and I've said user select none, which means don't let anyone highlight the text. And the reason I did that is because if you're clicking on this, your operating system will automatically select that text for you, which I didn't want to happen. Now you'll notice I also have Mozilla-user-select none. And if I were going to test this in Safari and in iOS and mobile Safari, I would need to put a bunch more of these. These are called vendor prefixes. So this is for Mozilla Firefox. There's -WebKit for Safari. There are a number of them. And that's because this isn't standardized yet. So some browsers will listen to just this basic one, but not all of them. So when a feature is not standard yet, they put it behind a vendor prefix. And so that can be annoying, but you just list them out. And it's good to go. So, learning resources for web stuff that you should know about. Mozilla Developer Network is probably the best resource out there right now. If you are interested in doing specific things like not allowing a user to select text, and you want to know, is that something I can do in all the browsers I need to support, this website is wonderful. It's called caniuse.com, and you can type in a feature, whether that's CSS or JavaScript or HTML, and it will give you kind of a matrix and show you all the browsers and what the support looks like in each version. This emoji is called anguish. W3 Schools is not the end of the world, and it's not the worst thing in the world, but you should avoid it. The quality of information from W3 Schools has improved drastically over the past few years. But there was an unfortunate thing that happened where somehow W3 Schools got the top result in search indexing for most queries relating to CSS, JavaScript, HTML. It is nowhere near as good as this. This will teach you what you need to know and give you good examples. This will give you examples that probably work, but may not give you exactly the intuition you need. So just proceed with caution there. Obviously, that's my opinion. Okay, so if you don't like to read, all of those resources are things that you read. Mozilla Developer Network is really nice because we'll look at it in a second, but it has kind of like the standard documentation and the little guide, but it also has little interactive, bits of code every so often throughout the guide. So you can play with things and see how they actually work in the browser. If you don't want to read, these are some decent YouTube channels. This first one is Design Course. This guy covers a lot of the UI design tools, so like Experience Design, Figma, InVision, all of those. He's got quite a few both lengthy and not so lengthy courses over these things, and they're not bad. They're from a design perspective, so it's not heavy technical details, but it's a pretty nice overview of software and how to do specific things. So if you are interested in more of the technical details, there is a channel, the Net Ninja, which just covers all kinds of things. So you can find CSS, JavaScript, you can find server-side, Node.js, you can find all the frameworks and stuff that we haven't even talked about yet on that channel. If you're starting to look at layout specifically, so this guy's channel, he has some great courses on what's called CSS Grid and CSS Flexbox, which are kind of new but really great standards for laying things out on your interface.
He does that 30 days of JS, right?
Yeah. So he's got a number of courses, and he also has some paid courses and stuff. But he also has like websites of free. You can do like a daily JS, challenge and kind of learn things. And all of this, kind of everything we'll look at today is there's no frameworks or anything. It's just pure JavaScript, pure CSS. There are lots of libraries and frameworks you can use, and we can talk about those later a little bit. But they do require you to invest in learning the framework, but they kind of already assume that you know this lower level stuff. And I can tell you, if you spend your time learning a framework and you don't know the lower level stuff, you will find yourself in a place of pain at some point, probably, because things will be happening and it won't be clear as to why. So let's look at, I'm going to try to do a little bit of prototyping this for you, Smart Nightlight. So I'm going to actually try to code on this horrible resolution monitor. And I'm going to use, so I'm not a user of Visual Studio Code. I use Sublime, but Sublime is not free. I mean, it's free, but it will annoy you until you, yeah. So Visual Studio Code is platform independent. It's just an IDE, lets you edit things, and it's very popular now. So we'll just go ahead and use it. I should say, for anyone concerned about privacy, the first thing you'll want to do once you install Visual Studio Code is go to Settings, and then search for Telemetry, and go ahead and disable that send everything to Microsoft thing there, because they do read all of your code there if you don't uncheck that. So that may or may not matter. Okay. So I'm just going to go ahead and I have a folder on my file system. It's got nothing in it. And I'm going to drag it over here into the editor. And let's see. I will go ahead and make some new folders. So the first folder I'm going to make is just CSS. And then I'm going to make a folder for JavaScript. And I should say, the example we'll do will only have one file in each of these, but it's just kind of good practice to keep things organized. And then I'll go ahead and create a file, kind of the default name for the default page in a directory is index.html. So I'm also going to go ahead and, so over on the file system you can see it's just created those things. I kind of want to reference some of these sketches, so I'm going to copy them over into here as well. I'm going to start with HTML. And actually, wait, I should show you something else. So something that you'll want to do so that you can actually see your website as it's being developed, you can just open that index.html file in a browser, but that will cause you pain later because browsers like to protect you from bad things happening. And so when you open a file locally, you can't communicate with the outside world usually, and you can't do a lot of things that you would like to do. Also, this extension that I'm going to install will live reload things as we work in the browser. And so I've already got it installed. It's just called Live Server. But to install it, you would just click on extensions, and then you can just search for them. They come up. You find what you want. You install it. So in this case, over here in my in-class folder, let's see if I can. I will go ahead and I have an option now when I right-click on it that just says Open with Live Server. So when I hit that, says live server restarted, blah, blah, blah. Let's see. Oh, hey, it doesn't want to do it because I don't have any HTML here. That's fair enough. Okay, I understand. So I'm going to go ahead and put some HTML in here. So it will kind of auto-suggest things for me. I have that's not the one I want. So I have some snippets here of commonly used things. It comes with snippets of commonly used things. So in this case, this is the one that I prefer. Let me just, is that visible? So I was really hoping to get a little bit better resolution with this projector, but you know. So okay, this is just default HTML template. So we can go ahead and put our title. This is going to be the Smart Night Light here. I'm going to save that. I think, let me see, we've got. I'm going to close the server just real quick, and then I'm going to reopen it. Open with live server. Okay. And I think it may be opening it over here. Yes, it is. Okay. So mine is set up to default to Firefox. You can set up whatever browser you want it to work in. So in this case, it's just opened up the page that I'm making in Firefox, and you can see the title is there, but there is literally nothing else happening in the browser. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and show you something that's really important when you're doing web development. So in Firefox, for example, I'm going to go down here to Web Developer, and I'm going to hit Toggle Tools. And this wonderful panel down here is going to come up, and it has all kinds of great things that will help you. So let me show you what this looks like if you're on just another website. So let's just go to Mississippi State. Oh no. So for example, you're on Mississippi State's website. I'm going to do a keyboard shortcut to get it. But what this will do, will let you do things like inspect a website. So if I click on this little inspector tool, I can literally go into this website and find the HTML that is correlated with things. I can, over here, I can see the CSS, I can change it and get it, to react immediately. I can, just not recognized. Like I can just change things, right? So this is great if you want to make, fake things real quickly. This is really powerful. But the main point of this is that we can look and we can see our layout. We can see how the browser is computing things, and that's great. One of the other things we can do if you hit this little icon here is we can see this for various mobile devices and how it's going to do that. So like here we've got, what does it look like on an iPad? Or an iPhone, or you can just kind of drag this out to see how the website changes. So you can see, actually, we have a responsive website here. So like browser size, you've got the navigation across the top here, but once it gets down to mobile size, that navigation goes away, and I guess, yes, it's up here now. Very good. Okay, so that's nice. Let me jump over real quick just to show you. Chrome and I have a troubled relationship right now. So Chrome kind of led the way with these kinds of developer tools. So if you want to find those tools in Chrome, you can go to More Tools and Developer Tools. And you get a panel that looks really quite similar here. So we could also just go, same website, same kind of thing, right? Just picking these things out. We could change these things. Just get rid of some of that. So same kind of tools in Chrome as in Firefox. And I should say you can do a ton with this. So once you start writing JavaScript and things, like you can run things in a console here. So this is just a live JavaScript console. So I can just like there's a global object called window, hit window. It's going to give me kind of that object and all of its properties just right here, and I can go through them. So that's really helpful. All of the browsers have this. Safari has this. I'm sure Edge has this. I've never used it, but it's really nice. We didn't used to have this a long time ago. So So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and close Chrome. And really the thing that just broke me on Chrome is I don't want to log into Chrome, and I don't want it to log me into Chrome when I log into something within Chrome. That's wrong, and everyone should be upset about that. But that's an opinion. So, okay, so back over here. So this is our smart nightlight app, which is not looking great right now. I'm going to go ahead and tap this mobile thing, and I'm going to choose just an iPhone 10. I'm going to close this, and then I'm going to shrink this a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and put these side by side so that we can see things a little bit better. So when you're developing an app, whether you're doing it in HTML and web stuff, or if you're doing it with some native thing, you kind of have to pick a starting point. Am I going to start with the mobile version? Am I going to start with the desktop version? There's been a lot of emphasis towards mobile first lately, and so I am primarily going to do mobile first because I have only so many pixels here to share with you to put things side by side. But you can do this either way. So the idea being that you kind of create your layout and your components, and you structure them how you want them to look on a mobile device. Then you go ahead and drag that out to a bigger device, and it looks horrible, and you write some rules to make it look better on that device. And we'll see that you can do breakpoints as you go on that. Okay, so let me grab a file real quick. We'll just split this yet again. So just looking at our sketch right there. Okay, so squeeze everything in here. We'll make our sketch quite small so that we can kind of see it. Okay, so we've got the sketch, and we're here in the body of our HTML. So the first thing is just kind of the header that's up there. So I'm going to do this with what's called a div tag, which is essentially it's nothing until it's styled. And it's a really common tag that you'll see in HTML. And in our case, for right now, I'm just going to put smart nightlight in here. Okay, I'm going to save that. You're going to see that it's showing up over here. Okay. And looking, not that great. So let's go ahead and I'm going to create a CSS file. So I'm just going to call this nightlight main.css. Okay. Here's the CSS file. And I'm going to, so that I can actually style this element specifically, I'm just going to give it an ID of, I'm going to call it title. I'm going to call it app title, like that. Okay, so I've saved that, and nothing has changed. And the other thing I need to do is I need to link to the CSS file I'm going to write. So I'm going to link style sheet, and then actually I'm getting style sheet. And then I'm going to go ahead and give the style sheet path, which is the CSS folder and nightlight main.css. We'll save that. Nothing's changed because I haven't done anything over here. So over here I'm going to go ahead and select my app title in CSS. And the first thing I'll do is I'm going to give it a background color of cyan, and I've done something wrong because it was not updated over here. And that's just so I can see where it's at. Let me just jump over real quick and make sure I haven't done anything horrible. Yes, I will give you these files. So my mistake was I didn't put an H for href. And I'm sliding over and consulting my previous little version of this so that you guys don't have to wait for me to solve problems too long. But I should say web development is very much about looking things up and being wrong and just banging your head into a keyboard sometimes. I've been doing web development for like a lot of years, and That's just part of it. So some of this will get put into muscle memory, some of it won't. Okay, so now it's got a beautiful background on it, and that's wonderful. We don't have a lot of time, so we're going to do this after spring break. We're going to do a lot more of this, but just to show you that you can, do fun things like center the text, or as you should all, set sans serif font because that's important. Make it bold, you can make the font size larger. So you can just keep going with this. But we'll pick this up after spring break. So let me just real quick check. Yes. Okay, so I will post the exam on Thursday morning, but I will see you in 2 weeks. Have a good spring break.